Welcome back to On the Same Page. We are on Daf Nun Zayin Amud Beis, 57b of Maseches Kiddushin, and we are starting 6 lines down the page. The first word on the line is She'asurim, and we will begin from the second word, which is Debei Rabbi Yishmael, in the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Yishmael. So the Gemara was discussing the Tzipori Mitzorah, the birds of a Mitzorah, someone who has tzaras, the birds involved in the purification process. One of the birds, he or she would take 2 birds. One of them gets shechted, and the blood is used in sprinkling on the mitzorah. The other bird gets sent away. And we had 2 verses that had something extra in them, from which we learn that one of these birds will be permitted and one of them will be forbidden. So at the bottom of Nun Zayin Amud Aleph, the Gemara quoted, there was one pasuk that talked about in general, birds that are kosher and you're allowed to eat. And it said, Kol tzipor torah tochelu, all kosher birds you shall eat, but all is extra. So the Brisa taught us that came to include even the mitzorah bird that gets sent away, you're allowed to eat that. Meaning if somebody would find that bird, it would be permitted. And there was another verse which said, regarding non-kosher animals, it said, Zeh asher lo tochlu mehem, these are the ones that you shouldn't eat from them. And the word asher was extra, and that, the Brisa said, was coming to teach me that the bird that gets shechted in the process of the mitzorah purification, that bird is forbidden, and will forever be forbidden. So the Gemara asked, how do you know which of the birds, why do we include and say that the one that gets sent away is permitted, and the one that gets shechted is forbidden? Maybe it should be the opposite. Maybe the one that's shechted should be permitted, and the one that's sent away should be forbidden. So we saw one answer last week, and now the Gemara gives another answer. So again, 6 lines down, the Gemara says, Debei Rabbi Yishmael Tana, in the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Yishmael, they taught that you can learn it from the following. De'amar Kra, because the pasuk says regarding the bird that you send away, it says, V'shilach al pnei hasadeh, that you should send it on the face of the field. Now, why does it have to tell me on the face of the field? That's extra. So it's to tell me that it should be kisadeh, it should be like a field, masadeh mutaris, just like a field is permitted, af hainami mutaris, so too, this bird that gets sent away is also permitted. That is, that's how we know that the one that gets sent away is permitted. Ask the Gemara, hai sadeh v'hachi hu da'asa, the word sadeh, that's what it's coming to teach me. Hahumi baile, we need that for the following. You're right, it's extra, but it's already teaching me something else. Likidetanya, like we learned in a Brisa. Sadeh, it teaches me you should send it out to a field. That teaches me actually where you have to send it. Shelo yamod biyafo v'zirkenu layam. That if you're in Yafo, you can't send it out to the sea. Yafo is by the sea, you can't send it to the sea. Begeves v'zirkenu lemidbar. And if you're in Geves, which bordered a desert, you can't send it into the desert. You have to send it to a field. That's where you have to send it. And you can't be outside a city and send it into a city, because that's not into a field. Rather, you have to be in a city and send it. It actually says in the pasuk that you should send it outside the city. It sounds like you're already in the city, and it also says, and it also says to the field, so that teaches me that you have to send it outside the city into a field. So that's what it's needed for. So if it's needed to teach me that, so how can I say that it's also teaching me that just like a field is permitted, so too this bird is permitted? Ve'idach, so that other opinion will respond, Im king nichtov kras sadeh. If Torah could have said, V'shilach al pnei sadeh, and you should send it to a field. My hasadeh, why does it say the field? That's extra, it's an extra hey. Shvamina tarti, that's telling me that we can learn 2 things from here, because there's an extra letter here, so we can learn 2 things. We can learn, just like a field is permitted, so too this bird is permitted, and also where you're to send it to is to a field. That's the second answer why we know that it's the bird that gets sent away that becomes permitted. Rava says a third answer, Amra Torah shalach l'takala. The Torah wouldn't tell us send it away to create takala, to create a stumbling block. Because if the bird that you send away is forbidden, then you're just putting people in, you're putting a stumbling block in front of everybody. Nobody's going to know, somebody will find this bird in the wild. They'll think it's like any other bird and that it's permitted as long as it's a kosher bird. And in fact, this was a bird that became forbidden. That doesn't make sense. The Torah wouldn't do that. So logically speaking, it makes sense, says Rava, that it must be that the one that gets sent away is permitted. The Torah won't tell us to send it away to create this stumbling block. Okay. Now back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah that we are discussing was listing a number of cases of items that are forbidden b'hana. You can't benefit from them. And therefore, if a man would try to give any of these items to a woman for Kiddushin, the Kiddushin would not take effect because there's no value to it. She can't benefit from it. So one of the examples was B'seir Nazir, the hair of a Nazir. A Nazir is forbidden to cut his or her hair. And not only that, but the hair itself is forbidden to benefit from. And therefore, if the hair was giving us Kiddushin, it would not work. Now, Minalan, from where do we know that the hair is forbidden to benefit from? Da'amakra, because the pasuk says regarding the hair of a Nazir, Kadosh yeh gadel pera. The hair that grows wildly shall be kadosh, shall be holy. And that teaches me, gadol pera sarosha, the hair of his head. Gidulo yeh kadosh. That teaches me that it should be kadosh, that it should be holy, and you can't benefit from it. I asked the Gemara, Ima kodesh tofes es dam of yotzi l'chulin, af sar nazir tofes es dam of yotzi l'chulin. Well, if it's being defined as kodesh, so it sounds like it's similar to kodshim or hektish, something that's designated or consecrated for the Beis HaMikdash, for the temple. And if that's the case, well, when somebody makes something hektish, if he then redeems it on money, the item becomes permitted, and the money takes on the kedusha. So is that true for the hair of the Nazir as well? So that's if we're comparing it to kodshim, to hektish, because we're saying it's kodesh, it's holy, so it seemingly will have that same halacha. So the Gemara says no, mikarinan kodesh. It doesn't say that it's kodesh, kadosh Korean. It says it's kadosh. What's the difference between kodesh and kadosh? So Rashi tells us that kodesh implies that it's called kodesh, but it's not intrinsically holy. It has it's declared holy for now, but that can transfer onto money. And that's the case for hektish, for something that's consecrated. But it doesn't say that about the hair of a Nazir. It says it's kadosh. Kadosh, Rashi says, implies that it is intrinsically kadosh. It's intrinsically holy, and therefore the holiness cannot transfer. It remains forbidden forever, and you can't redeem it for money. The hair of a Nazir is forbidden to benefit from forever. Okay, the next thing that the Mishnah said was bepeter chamor, the firstborn of a donkey. So the Torah in Parshas Bo talks about how a firstborn donkey needs to be redeemed, and it's redeemed by switching it, by trading it for a sheep, and the sheep is brought as a carbon. So until it is redeemed, it's forbidden to benefit from. And if you would give it as Kiddushin, it wouldn't work. So the Gemara says, Neima masnisin delo krib Shimon. This Mishnah seems to be not in line with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. D'Tanya, because we're learning a brisa, Peter chamor asr bahana. The firstborn donkey is forbidden to benefit from. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon not matir, but Rabbi Shimon allows it. So Rabbi Shimon says you are allowed to benefit from a firstborn donkey. So this Mishnah, our Mishnah, which says that it can't be used for Kiddushin because you can't benefit, seems to be in in contention, or unlike the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. So the Gemara says, Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Ravua, that really, no, it could even be going along the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, because the Mishnah could be talking about after the donkey's neck has been broken, and it could be going according to everyone, because the halacha is, if you don't redeem the donkey, so then the other choice is to break the donkey's neck. Now, the Gemara says that if the donkey is not redeemed and rather its neck is broken, then everybody agrees you can't benefit. Even Rabbi Shimon will agree you can't benefit. So that could be the case of the Mishnah. The Mishnah's case, when it says that if you give Kiddushin with Peter Chamor, with the firstborn donkey, it doesn't work because you can't benefit from it, it could be talking about after the donkey's neck has been broken, and that would be even according to Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon agrees that in that case you can't benefit from it. Okay, the next thing in the Mishnah was Basar b'chalav. Meat and milk that's been cooked together is forbidden to benefit from. And if a man will give a woman a meat and milk concoction that was cooked together, then it would not be a good Kiddushin. So the Gemara says, Minalan, from where do we know that you can't benefit from Basar b'chalav? Ditana de Rabbi Shmuel, because it was taught in the base medrash of Rabbi Shmuel. Lo sebashel gedi b'chalevimo. So the source for the prohibition of milk and meat is when the Torah says, do not cook a gedi, a kid goat, in its mother's milk. And it says it gimel pamim. The Torah says it 3 times. Echad israchilo. One time it says it gets to teach us that, first of all, the way it's expressed is you should not cook it. But it says it 3 times. So I understand you're not allowed to cook it. What else can you not do? So one time is to teach me that I can't eat it. Ve'echad isra hana. And the other one teaches me you can't benefit from it. Ve'echad isra bishul. And one of them teaches me that you cannot cook it. So there's a prohibition to cook milk and meat, there's a prohibition to eat milk and meat, and there's a prohibition to benefit from milk and meat that's been cooked together. The Gemara says, Mas'isin de lo ki aitana. Our Mishnah does not fit with the following Tana, the following opinion. The Tanya, because we're learning a Brisa. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda Omer. Reb Shimon ben Yehuda says, Basar b'chalav asar ba'achila u'mutter b'hana. Basar b'chalav, milk and meat that was cooked together, is forbidden to eat, but you are allowed to benefit from it. That's the opinion in this price of Reb Shimon ben Yehuda. Shenemar, how does he derive this, that you're allowed to benefit? So he makes the following drasha. The Torah says, Ki am kadosh ata Hashem elokecha, because you are a holy nation unto Hashem your God. Lo svashel gedi b'chalevimo, do not cook a goat in its mother's milk. Ulahalanu amr, and then later it says, Ve'anshe kodesh tiyumli, and you shall be holy people. And there it talks about not to eat treif, not to eat meat of an animal that is a treifa, that won't live. And rather, it says, what do you do with it? What do you do with the meat, with treif meat? It says there, la'kelav tashlichuno, so you should throw it to the dogs. But that's feeding your dogs. That's benefiting from it. So just like over there by treif meat, by treifa meat, it says it's forbidden to eat, but it's permitted to benefit from. So afkan, so here too, asr b'achila mutter b'hana. Here too, it's forbidden to eat, but you're allowed to benefit from it, because here too it says am kadosh ata. It says with regards to milk and meat, it says you are a holy nation, and with regards to treifa, it says anshe kodesh tiyumli, you are holy people unto me. So just like there by treifa, you're not allowed to eat it, but you are allowed to benefit. So too basar b'chalav, you are allowed to eat it, but you're not allowed to benefit from it. The opposite. You're not allowed to eat it, but you are allowed to benefit from it. That's the opinion of this price of Shimon ben Yehuda. That is not how we paskin. That is not the halacha. The halacha is you're not allowed to benefit from it, and that's how our Mishnah holds. Our Mishnah holds that you're not allowed to benefit from it. Okay. Then the Mishnah mentioned chulin shenishchatu ba'azara. Chulin, unconsecrated animals that are shechted in the walls of the Beis HaMikdash. So, karbanos, offerings are supposed to be shechted inside the walls of the Beis HaMikdash, but chulin is not allowed to be shechted there. Non-karbanos is not allowed to be shechted there, and the Mishnah says that you can't benefit from them, and therefore if you would shecht an animal inside the walls of the Beis HaMikdash, and then try to give it for Kiddushin, that since you can't benefit from it, the Kiddushin would not be good. So the Gemara asks, Mina hani mili. From where do we know this? From where do we know that you can't benefit from chulin shenishchatu ba'azara, from non-karbanos that were shechted in the Beis HaMikdash? So Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yochanan is saying in the name of Rabbi Meir, Amar Torah, the Torah says, Shchot li bishali. The Torah says, this isn't a quote of a pasuk, but it's what the will that the Torah expresses is that you should, Hashem says, you should shecht mine inside mine. Meaning, if the animal is for me, if it's a karban, shecht it in my walls, in the walls of the Beis HaMikdash. And you should shecht yours in yours. And meaning, if it's not a karban, if it's just meat that you're going to eat, then you should shecht it in your place. And this is derived from Pesukim. The Pesukim indicate that a karban needs to be shechted in the Beis HaMikdash, and that meat that's not a karban should be shechted outside of the Beis HaMikdash. And mashali b'shalcha aser. And just like if one would shecht, just like if one would shecht mine in yours, it would be aser, it would be forbidden to benefit from. Meaning, if a person shechts a karban outside the Beis HaMikdash, so that it can't be brought as a karban. In order to bring it as a karban, it would have had to be shechting in the Beis HaMikdash. If you shecht a karban outside the Beis HaMikdash, it's disqualified from being brought as a karban. If you can't bring it as a karban, then it can never become permitted, because this is if it was consecrated as a karban, but you can't bring it, it will never become permitted. So just like if you would go and shecht mine, God says, a karban outside the Beis HaMikdash, it would be forbidden to benefit from. So af shalcha b'shali aser. So too, if you shecht yours inside mine, meaning you shecht a non-karban inside the Beis HaMikdash, that will also be forbidden to benefit from. The Rabbi Meir is teaching like a mematzin, or like that we compare these cases. We have this idea that we can equate that just like my karbano, God says my animals, the karbanos are shechting in my place, and your animals are shechting in your place, and if you would shecht mine in yours, you couldn't benefit from it, so too, if you shecht yours in mine, you can't benefit from it. So the Gemara says, if we're making such a comparison, so we should continue it, we should take it a step further. Ima shali b'shalcha anosh kares, af shalcha b'shali anosh kares. The halacha is that if you shecht a karban outside the Beis HaMikdash, it's punishable by kares, by spiritual excision. And so too, you should take if we're making a comparison, we should say that if you shecht yours in mine, meaning if you shecht a non-karban, a regular cow for the meat inside the Beis HaMikdash, it should follow that also should be punishable by kares. So to that, we say no, because Amar Kra, because the Torah says, Del Pesach Olmei Lo Heviu, Lakriv Karban LaHashem. When it comes to this idea that if you shecht a karban outside the Beis HaMikdash, it's chayiv kares. The person is liable for kares, for spiritual excision. So the verse there says, Del Pesach Olmei Lo Heviu, if he didn't bring it to the opening of the tent of meeting, it's talking about the Mishkan, the temple, La'akriv karban LaHashem, to bring it as a karban, v'nichras, and he should be karaf. He gets kares. But we can deduce al karban anosh kares. For a karban, the punishment is kares, because it says la'akriv karban LaHashem v'nichras. If he didn't bring a karban, if he didn't shecht the karban in the right place, he gets kares. But on the flip side, though, we wouldn't say kares. On the flip side, which is that if you take yours, you take a non a chulin animal, a non-hektish animal, a non-carbon, and you shecht it inside the Beis HaMikdash, so you're not allowed to do that, but it will not be liable for kares, for spiritual excision. Says the Gemara, but now that that's the case, if that's true, so ikol mifrach, now we can, if they're not comparable in this way, so then the whole comparison falls apart, because now you can say, ikol mifrach, ma l'shali b'shalach, sheking anish kares. That you can't compare shali b'shalach to shalach b'shalach, or shalach b'shali, because they're different. In other words, we're trying to make a comparison. You have to shecht mine in mine, right? Karbanos in the temple, and yours, non-karbanos outside the temple. And if you mix it, we said, just like if you shecht a carbon outside, you can't benefit from it. So too, if you shecht a non-carbon inside the Beis HaMikdash, you shouldn't be able to benefit from it. And that's how we wanted to prove that chulin shenishchatu b'azara, that a non-carbon that shecht in the Beis HaMikdash, you can't benefit from. But now we're saying you can't compare these things, because we see they're not comparable. Because when it comes to kares, they're not comparable. Even though if you shecht a carbon outside the Beis HaMikdash, you get kares, but if you shecht a non-carbon inside the Beis HaMikdash, we deduce that you don't get kares. So you can't compare these two things. So we can't prove from here that chumash nishlu b'azara, a carbon that's shechted in the Beis HaMikdash, that you can't benefit from it. So we need a new source for that. So Ela Amar Abaye, so rather Abaye says mehacha. We can learn it from the following. There are 3 psukim with regards to a carbon shlamim that tell us, with regards to a peace offering, that tell us where he should shecht it. It says ushchato. These are all in the same chapter in Parshas Vayikra. It says ushchato, and he should shecht it by the opening of the tent of meeting. And it says v'shachato so, and he should shecht it. Again, these are different versions of the carbon shlamim, but each time it keeps repeating, you should shecht it by the opening of the tent of meeting, v'shachat oso. And the third time, all in Sefer Vayikra, Parak Gimel. And it says, Tuasa Kra Yiseri. It's 3 extra psukim, or I guess 2 are extra, but it says it 3 times. So Ma Talmud Lomar, so what's it coming to teach me to say over and over again? Lefi shenemar, because the Torah says on the flip side, it says Ki yirchak mimcha hamakom. It says that in a case where you're far from the Beis HaMikdash and you want to eat meat, so in the desert, Rashi tells us that they only ate meat by bringing it first as a carbon and then getting to eat the meat. Like we've discussed previously, an offering, like a shlamim, you get to eat the meat. You have to bring certain things on the mizbeach and give certain parts to the kohanim, but the main part of it you get to eat. So in the midbar, in the desert, when the Jews were traveling in the desert, whenever you wanted to eat meat, that's what you did. You brought your animal to the Mishkan, you brought it as a carbon, and then you got to eat the meat. When they entered the land of Israel, so then, people are further away from the Mishkan, can't, every time you want a steak sandwich, it's not so easy to come to the Mishkan. Not like it was easy in the desert either, but it's much more difficult, right? You have to travel long distances, so therefore the Torah tells us how instead you could just shecht it where you are. So that's the pasuk here that says, Ki yirchak mimcha hamakom. When it's a great distance to the place, meaning to the place of the Beis HaMikdash or the Mishkan, b'zavachta, then you should shecht your meat and then you can eat it that way. And and what that teaches is berichuk makom atazalech, you're allowed to shecht it if you're a distance from the temple, v'yat azalech b'makom karev, but you can't shecht your own personal meat close in the Beis HaMikdash. Prat l'chon shelo yishchadu b'azara. That teaches me that you're not allowed to shecht it in the azara. You can't shecht the meat inside the temple itself. Okay, then the Gemara continues and it says, Ve'en li ala tamimim, haru'uyim li karev. Now I only know that this is true for animals that are unblemished, which could be brought as a karban, because that's really what it's telling you. You might think you have to bring it as a karban if you want to eat the meat. It's saying, no, you could shecht it outside the walls of the temple, but not inside the walls of the temple. Now you might have thought, that's only true for an animal that's fit to be brought as a karban. But if you anyways can't bring it as a karban, the pasuk wasn't talking about that, and maybe if it has a blemish and it anyways can't be brought as a karban, I would be allowed to shecht it inside the walls of the Beis HaMikdash for my own personal use. So, minayim l'rabos ba'alei mumen. So how do I know to include if it has a mum, if it has a blemish and can't be brought as a karban, I still can't shecht it inside the temple walls? Mar ba'aniyas ba'alei mumen sheking min ha'machshir. The Gemara says that I can assume to include it because it's from the same type, meaning it's a type. It's an animal that's fit. The type of animal is fit to be brought as a karban. This particular one is a blemish, but I already excluded shechting your kosher animals inside the temple wall. So the fact that this one has a blemish and could have been brought as a karban won't change anything. It's also excluded and can't be shechted within the walls of the temple. Minayim l'rabos es chaya. Now, how do I know that you can't even shecht a chaya? Chaya is a non-domesticated animal. And no, there are no chayos that are karbanos. There are chayos that are kosher, like a deer, for example, but there are no chayos that are karbanos. So maybe it wasn't talking about chaya, and maybe you are allowed to shecht a chaya within the walls of the Beis HaMikdash. How do I know that you're not allowed to? So mar b'aniyas ha'chaya she b'shchita kebehema. Because at the end of the day, the way that it becomes kosher is through shchita, through shechting, and so it has the same. Is treated in the same way as a behemoth, as a domesticated animal. Just like a domesticated animal, I can't shecht inside the walls of the Beis HaMikdash, so too a chaya, undomesticated animal. Minayim l'rabos es ha'ofos. Now how do I know to include birds, that I can't shecht a bird inside? So here we say, Talmud Lomar, b'shachtu, b'shachat oso, b'shachat oso. So again, because it says it 3 times, those 3 times that we mentioned before, that teaches me that, and it's seemingly maybe coming from a different extra word here, that it doesn't say just shecht it 3 times, shecht it 3 times. Maybe it's coming from there, that it says it 3 times, it's superfluous, and one of them is to include ophos, to include birds. The other one, actually, Rashi says, is to include chaya. So even though I previously gave a source for chaya, a different source, for undomesticated animals, now we're turning around and saying, actually, we can deduce it from here, from the fact that it says, and you should shecht it 3 times, so you should shecht your karbanos inside the walls of the Beis HaMikdash, but not your behemoths for yourself, not your chayos for yourself, and not your ophos, not your birds for yourself. Yachol lo yishchot v'imshachat yemoter. Oh, so this is what we need, right? Because this is what we were trying to find out. You might think you shouldn't shecht it, but if you do, you're allowed to consume it. It doesn't become forbidden. So to that it says, Talmud Lomar, ki yirchak mimcha hamakom v'zavachta v'achalta. If you're at a distance and you shecht it, then you can eat it. Mashat hazovech b'richuk makom ha'tochel. Only that which you shechted outside the temple walls are you allowed to eat. But you're not allowed to eat that which you shecht inside the makom karban, a close place, meaning perhaps that's to exclude l'chulin shenishchatu ba'azara. That if you shecht chulin, non-karbanos, in the azara, in the Beis HaMikdash, so you're not allowed to eat them, they become forbidden. Meaning not only are you not allowed to shecht it, but if you do shecht it, you're not allowed to eat it. Now again, we circle back and we say, now I might think that you're not allowed to eat it if it was an animal that was fit for a karban. Right? Originally we said, I only know that it's forbidden if it's an animal that's fit for a karban, but if it has a blemish, I might think that you're allowed to shecht it. We proved that you're not allowed to shecht it, but now we circle again, we say, in terms of what if you do shecht it, and are you allowed to eat it? So we said you're not allowed to eat it. But now we're saying maybe that's only for a blemished animal, an unblemished animal, which could have been brought as a karban. Minayin l'rabos ba'alei mumin. How do I know that even if the animal has a mum, it's blemished? It can't be brought as a karban. I know I'm not allowed to shecht it, but how do I know that if I do shecht it, I'm still not allowed to eat it? If I shecht it in the walls of the Beis HaMikdash? Marbani ba'alei mumin shekei min ha'machshir. So the same thing that we said before. It's from the same min. It's from the same species. So the fact that this one has a mum, this one doesn't, either way, you can't shecht it and you can't eat it. Uminayin l'rabos is a chaya. And how do I know to include even chaya, even an undomesticated animal, that if you would shecht it, you couldn't eat it. If you would shecht it in the walls of the Beis HaMikdash, you wouldn't be allowed to eat it. Marbani is a chaya, she b'shchita kibehema. I can include it because it requires shchita. It requires the same preparation process of shechting, just like a behema, just like an undomesticated animal. Sorry, just like a domesticated animal. And so the halachos would seemingly be the same. And minayin l'rabos is ofos. And how do I know that to include birds? Talmud lomar b'shachto b'shachat oso b'shachat oso. Again, it says it 3 times that a carbon you should shecht inside by the Ohel Moed, by the temple, by the Mishkan, but non-carbonos you shouldn't, and it says it 3 times, you shouldn't shecht behemos, domesticated animals, you shouldn't shecht chayos, undomesticated animals, you shouldn't shecht birds. And finally, we come to the original point, which is, okay, I know I'm not allowed to eat it, how do I know that I can't benefit from it? Because that was really the original question, was what's the source that chulin shenishchatu ba'azara, that chulin, non-carbonos, that shechting in the temple, that you're not allowed to benefit from it? So yachol lo yishchot. I might think you're not allowed to shecht it, v'im shachat yashulchenu lifnei klavim, but if you do, you can throw it to the dogs, meaning you can benefit from it. Talmud lomar, that's why the Torah says, la'kelav tashlichun oso. With regards to treifa, it says you should give it to the dogs. And we learn from there, oso atamashach, that you can throw to the dogs, lakelev, the atamashach chulin shenishchatu ba'azara, but you cannot throw chulin shenishchatu ba'azara to the dogs. You cannot throw a non-carbon, an animal that's supposed to be shechted outside the temple. If you shecht it in the temple, you're not allowed to shecht it. If you do, you can't eat it. And now we're saying, and you can't even benefit from it. And that is going to be the source, according to Abaye, for the idea of our Mishnah, that if you try to give chulin shenishchatu ba'azara to a woman for Kiddushin, it won't work because it's not allowed to benefit from. We learn it from, because by treifa it says, la'kelav tashlichun oso, that you should throw to the dogs, but that teaches me that that chulin shenishchatu ba'azara, chulin, non-carbonos, that are shechting in the walls of the Beis HaMikdash, which is forbidding, you also cannot benefit at all from that meat. We will pick up from here, Mirz Hashem, next time.